The sound you just heard, that dry, hollow click, killed more men in the American West than any lawman's bullet. Hollywood has spent the last 100 years selling us a fantasy. They show us the Colt Peacemaker as a divine instrument of justice. In the movies, it never jams. It never rusts. It fires 12 rounds without reloading, and it can hit a silver dollar thrown in the air at 50 paces. They call it the gun that won the West. But if you dig into the ordnance reports from the U.S., cavalry in 1874, or the personal diaries of the drovers on the Chisholm Trail, you find a very different story. You find a story of mechanical failure. The truth is that the Model 1873 Colt single-action army was a machine. And like all machines built in the 19th century, it was prone to breaking, freezing, and failing at the exact moment it was needed most. The real West wasn't won by a shiny pistol. It was survived by men who knew that their weapon was just as likely to blow up in their hand as it was to fire. Today we are going to strip away the chrome and the pearl handles. We are going to look at the chemistry of black powder, the metallurgy of weak springs, and the grim reality of what happened when a cowboy pulled the trigger and nothing happened. This is not the legend. This is the rusty, jammed, and dirty truth about the guns of the Old West. To understand why these weapons failed, we first have to understand the economy and the chemistry of 1873. The Colt single action army was adopted by the military for a reason. It was robust compared to its predecessors. But robust in 1873 does not mean reliable by modern standards. When this gun hit the market, it cost approximately $17,000. To the modern ear, that sounds cheap. But the average working cowboy, the man in the saddle, not the movie star, earned about $25 to $30 a month. This weapon represented nearly a month's wages. It wasn't a disposable tool. It was a massive financial investment. Yet, Hollywood shows us cowboys dropping their guns in the dirt, fanning the hammers, and treating them with reckless abandon. In reality, a bent ejector rod or a broken mainspring was a financial catastrophe. There were no gunsmiths on the open range. If your gun broke in the middle of a cattle drive, you didn't fix it. You carried a 2-pound paperweight. But the real enemy wasn't the cost. It was the propellant. We forget that the Old West was a black powder era. Smokeless powder didn't become common until the very end of the frontier period. Black powder is a mixture of sulfur, charcoal, and potassium nitrate. It is an explosive, yes, but it is also filthy. Every time a cartridge was fired, it didn't just push a bullet out. It coated the inside of the gun with a thick, sticky sludge called fouling. This wasn't just dust. It was a corrosive residue that absorbed moisture from the air. In the humid heat of Texas or the damp cold of the Dakotas, a gun that wasn't cleaned immediately, and I mean within hours, would begin to rust from the inside out. The movies show us shiny steel. The reality was pitted iron. A cowboy didn't have gun oil and solvent kits. He had animal fat and maybe a rag. He was fighting a losing war against chemistry. The romantic image of the gleaming six-shooter is a lie. The reality was a tool fighting to function against its own ammunition. Beyond the chemistry, there was the mechanical design itself. The Colt single-action army had a fatal flaw that cost countless men their legs, and sometimes their lives. It was called the fixed firing pin. The firing pin was machined directly onto the hammer. If the hammer was down, the pin was resting on the primer of the cartridge. There were no transfer bars, no modern safeties. This meant that if a cowboy dropped his gun, which happened often with slick leather gloves and spooked horses, or if he fell from his saddle, the impact on the hammer would ignite the round. This leads us to the six-shooter myth. Hollywood shows the hero loading 6 rounds before the big fight. In the real West, loading 6 rounds was considered an act of stupidity or a suicide wish. Experienced men practiced the 5-bean rule. You loaded 1, skipped 1, and loaded 4. This ensured the hammer rested on an empty chamber. This simple decision reduced the weapon's capacity by 17%. You didn't have 6 shots, you had 5. But under stress, men made mistakes. Diaries from the era are full of accounts of accidental discharges. A man named Plunkett, a drover on the Goodnight-loving trail, lost his foot not to a Comanche arrow, but because his horse bucked, his revolver slipped, the hammer hit the saddle horn, and he put a .45 caliber slug through his own ankle. There is no glory in that. There is no duel at high noon, just a man bleeding out in the dirt because of a primitive mechanical design. The mistake of trusting the safety of a 19th century revolver was a mistake you usually only made once. Here is the detail that the history books gloss over and the movies completely ignore: the metallurgical failure. When the .45 Colt cartridge was first introduced, the casings were made of copper, not brass. Copper is soft. When black powder explodes, it generates immense pressure and heat. The copper casing would expand to seal the chamber, which is good, but because it was so soft, it wouldn't spring back to its original shape. It would stick. This is the nightmare scenario. You are in a firefight. You fire your TU first cylinder. You open the loading gate to eject the spent shells, but the ejector rod, a thin, flimsy piece of metal housing, isn't strong enough to push the expanded copper out. The casing is seized in the chamber. We have archaeological evidence of guns found at battle sites, including the Little Bighorn, where the ejector rods are bent or broken off entirely. Soldiers and warriors were frantically trying to pry stuck casings out of their guns with knives or sticks while being shot at. Later, the army switched to brass, which is more elastic. But for years, civilian cowboys bought the cheaper copper surplus ammo. Imagine the panic. You pull the trigger, the gun fires, but you cannot reload. Your six-shooter is now a club. And let's talk about the fanning technique, where the movie hero holds the trigger and slaps the hammer rapidly. In reality, the internal springs of the Colt, the hand and the bolt, were made of tempered steel that was notoriously brittle. Fanning a Colt 1873 would shatter the internal leaf springs within a few cylinders. If you tried to be a Hollywood hero in 1875, you would end up holding a broken pile of parts. The gun would lock up tight. The reality of the gunfight was not speed. It was hoping your weapon didn't disintegrate mechanically under the stress of rapid fire. Let's assume the gun didn't rust, the ammo didn't jam, and the springs didn't break. You still had to hit what you were aiming at. The accuracy of the Old West revolver is perhaps the biggest lie of them all. The sights on a standard Colt were rudimentary: a tiny groove milled into the top strap, and a front blade that was often bent or filed down to prevent it from snagging on the holster. These were sights designed for point shooting at ranges of less than 10 yards. But the real blinder was the smoke. We mentioned black powder is dirty. It is also voluminous. When a .45 caliber black powder round goes off, it creates a basketball-sized fireball and a thick, opaque cloud of white, sulfurous smoke. If there was no wind, that smoke didn't move. In a gunfight after the first shot, you were effectively blind. You weren't aiming at a man, you were aiming at a gray cloud and muzzle flashes. This explains why historical accounts of shootouts describe dozens of rounds fired with almost no hits. In the famous 4 dead in 5 seconds gunfight in El Paso, 1881, the distances were incredibly close, yet men missed. Why? Because they were flinching from the recoil, blinded by smoke, and using weapons with horrible ergonomics for precision shooting. The consequence was that men didn't stand in the street and duel. They got close, dangerously close. They wanted to be close enough to burn the other man's shirt with the muzzle blast, because that was the only way to guarantee a hit. Survival meant getting close and being brutal. It meant shooting a man in the back or from a dark alley. The fair fight was a myth created by people who didn't have to rely on these inaccurate, smoke-belching machines to stay alive. We look at the Colt Peacemaker today in museums, sitting behind glass, polished and lit by soft lights. We see a legend. We see the tool of the hero. But the men who carried them saw a heavy, rusting lump of iron that cost a month's wages and required constant maintenance just to keep it from seizing up. They saw a tool that was dangerous to carry fully loaded, prone to jamming with cheap ammo, and liable to break if handled too roughly. The West wasn't tamed by the perfection of the gun. It was tamed in spite of its failure. The survival of the American pioneer didn't depend on the chrome plating of his weapon, but on his ability to keep a cool head when the hammer clicked on a bad primer, or when the ejector rod snapped in his hand. The next time you see a movie cowboy fan the hammer and hit a coin at 50 yards, remember the rusty truth. Remember the copper casing stuck in the cylinder. Remember the cloud of blinding smoke. The legend is precise. The reality was a jammed mechanism and a prayer.